we need to really democratize access. Anyone can be an innovator, anywhere. And yet, I think many countries have started to recognize that there are concentrations of where investments have tended to go, and we could do better about spreading those investments and really meeting folks, as Bridget said, meeting folks where they are and allowing them to be empowered to become the leaders of their hometowns, of their communities, of their regions, as opposed to they have to get training elsewhere and they have to go elsewhere to be successful. How do we create those socioeconomic ladder upward mobility opportunities, whether I'm in Louisiana or I'm in North Dakota or I'm in Boston or I'm in Washington, D.C. and so on.
Thank you for listening to Sprint, the podcast of the Federal Agency for Disruptive Innovation of Germany. Today, with a live recording in Leipzig at the 5th birthday party of our agency. My name is Thomas Ramge, and I look very much forward to the conversation with today's guests, which are Erwin Gianchandany and Bridget Turaga from the American National Science Foundation, who have just here on stage in Leipzig announced a new partnership between the NSF and SPRIND. Thank you, Erwin. Thank you, Bridget, for being here in Leipzig and for bringing us interesting insights just over the Atlantic.
Thanks for having us. We're looking forward to it.
Great to be here.
Well, let's be honest. From our perspective, we often have the impression that America is such an innovative country. What might you sort of look into how SPRIND is doing innovation? What was the starting point?
So maybe I'll start, and Bridget, you should feel free to add on. So first of all, thanks for having us. Delighted to be with you today. I think that we are proud of the accomplishments of our science and engineering enterprise over the course of the last 5, 6, 7 decades, right? The National Science Foundation, our agency, has been around since 1950. So we actually celebrate our 75th anniversary next year, by the way. But that said, I think we also have to recognize that we approach science and engineering with humility too. There are great efforts that are underway in all different parts of the world. And I think there are opportunities for us to learn from other parts of the world, just like other parts of the world have tended to learn from us as well. And so in the context of SPRIND in particular, I think the work that this agency has been doing over the last 5 years is actually very symbiotic with some of the work that we have initiated at the National Science Foundation just in the last couple of years as part of a new directorate that we stood up, the Directorate for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. We're really excited about the acceleration that SPRIND has brought to the table. How do we accelerate research to innovation and to impact at the end of the day? We're really excited with the teaming that SPRIND has orchestrated. How do we bring together folks from not just the research community, but the market space as well to really understand what are those sort of market shaping characteristics that we should be thinking about? And I think we're also really excited about the prospect of, these challenge problems that SPRIND has focused in on, that have helped with that acceleration, that have helped with that teaming. It's really challenge problems and looking for disruptive innovation that you can bring to the market and bring to commercialization in a meaningful way. And so I think all of those are features of what SPRIND has clearly demonstrated with great success over the course of the last few years. It's symbiotic with our mission space within my directorate. And so I think it makes sense for us to really collaborate and learn from one another in terms of what we're doing well and what we stand to do even better.
Tell us a little bit more about the National Science Foundation first. What's your role in the whole complex of innovation and science in the U.S.?
Sure. So as Erwin mentioned, the National Science Foundation is having its 75th anniversary, which you would call its birthday next year. And we fund fundamental and use-inspired research across all scientific disciplines except for the medical sciences. And we've done that for a number of years. And in addition, we also fund tech startups, which we started doing in the 1970s, really trying to form that strong foundation of research throughout the United States and all 50 states. States, and also then moving it to translational research. And that was done in part through the creation of the Technology Innovation and Partnerships Directorate at NSF. And we think about our mission and design our programs really around 3 pillars. So thinking about how do we create innovation ecosystems in many places throughout the United States. Of course, we know about the Boston area and Silicon Valley, but there are many other places where there's awesome talent. And so how can we create opportunities for that awesome talent to drive scientific discoveries? And we think about it in terms of a second pillar, which is really technology translation. How do we move research out of the lab so that it can have that societal impact that we want to see, whether that's commercialization or through the creation of open source ecosystems, something that could be for societal good. And then finally, our third pillar is thinking about the talent, the workforce development, making sure that we've got the training in place so that we can meet people where they are and help them along their pathway as they're looking to be innovators and to be entrepreneurs.
Are there any specific challenges that U.S. scientists face when translating knowledge into innovative products? Because we would suspect you're such an entrepreneurial society with heaps of venture capital and so forth. But might that be an idealizing picture that we have here?
I think we all have. It's sort of the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, right? I think there's always this idealized view of the U.S. from other parts of the world, and even Germany from other parts of the world, right? And so I think that, in fact, we in the U.S. have for many, many years talked about that bridge, if you will, or that valley, we call it, the valley of death, the so-called valley of death between the lab and the research that's taking place and the market and societal impact with that research, right? What I like to talk about, and Bridget and I have spent, and others in our directorate, a lot of time talking about this over the last few years, it's not a singular valley of death, right? That's how it's portrayed. That's how we've talked about it historically. But in reality, there are many micro valleys along the way in the journey going from a lab to going to practice. And I think one of the things that we are proud of is the fact that we have introduced interventions in that journey from lab to market, lab to society, that have paid huge dividends and have helped researchers and teams really accelerate progress. So Bridget mentioned we have invested since the 1970s in deep tech startups and small businesses, right? Every year we invest $250 million through my directorate in over 400 startups and small businesses. They're at a certain point in that spectrum from lab to market where really having the resources to be able to do that feasibility assessment of, is there a market potential with my concept, is really ripe, right? And really what they need to be able to do. But there are clearly pain points, gaps, hurdles in that journey that have yet to be filled. And I think that what we're trying to do is really understand what are the pilots that we can explore that help researchers help researchers really be able to bridge those gaps, those micro valleys, as they go from lab to market in any concept that they're taking. And I think the other important thing here is those gaps vary by technology area. If I'm talking about a particular sub-area of artificial intelligence, for instance, where the barriers are to translation may look a little bit different than if I'm talking about biotechnology and protein design or protein synthesis, for instance, right? So I think a realization that there is no one size fits all, and we need many different models and mechanisms and interventions and intervention points in that journey from lab to market. I think that's something that we are really recognizing as our researchers in the US and around the world really try to embark on that pathway.
How you do that, Bridget? How do you empower those science talents to surmounting those hurdles? Although I obviously understand that there's no one-size-fits-all solution, but can you give us some hints? What are the most important sort of actions where you come in saying, maybe we might be able to help you here?
Yeah, so sometimes we talk about having a tip toolkit. We have tools that are available to help our scientists, our entrepreneurs, move in the direction that they need to. Some of that's just is through entrepreneurial training. So we have a program called Innovation Core. It takes academics who have been working on science and technology, and it makes them think about the market. They have this intensive 7-week kind of boot camp where they do about 100 interviews with customers in the market to find out, is there potential for my innovation? Is it what I thought, or is it completely different? And sometimes it's completely different, and they realize that they have to pivot. But it's that changing their mindset, making sure that they're aware of the broader context so that it's not just the technology push, but it's the market pull, it's the society pull, it's understanding the broader atmosphere. So that's our Innovation Core program. We also fund individual projects, individual teams who work on getting that prototype ready, moving their technology or their product to the next stage. But then we also take a step back and think, what's the ecosystem that we want to create? What are the challenges that are at institutional levels? And how do we bring players together to address those challenges? And so we have programs like our regional innovation engines, which bring communities together around a shared challenge. So if you're in the state of North Dakota, where 95% of the land is farmland or is agriculture or ranches, then agriculture is going to be kind of the sweet spot there for creating jobs and also for innovation. But in order to move that forward, we need to be bringing the farmers together with the other players, with maybe the researchers from the lab to get that kind of convergence approach, build that broader ecosystem so that we can be creating jobs, training folks, getting new technologies out there, combining incremental progress with some of the more disruptive innovations in a larger ecosystem point of view.
So you're a matchmaker for innovation, is that it?
Well, we enable the community to find their own partners and to make their own matches, in part, by providing funding.
Well, the NSF and SPRIND have found each other.
I think there's something to be said for that. Sorry, I just want to build on Bridget's comment. I think there's something to be said for being that matchmaker, and in particular, so one of the motivations for establishing this new directorate a couple of years ago was the notion that we need to really democratize access. Anyone can be an innovator, anywhere. And yet, I think many countries have started to recognize that there are concentrations of where investments have tended to go, and we could do better about spreading those investments and really meeting folks, as Bridget said, meeting folks where they are and allowing them to be empowered to become the leaders of their hometowns, of their communities, of their regions, as opposed to they have to get training elsewhere and they have to go elsewhere to be successful. How do we create those socioeconomic ladder upward mobility opportunities, whether I'm in Louisiana or I'm in North Dakota or I'm in Boston or I'm in Washington, D.C. and so on?
At least for sure, from what we see right now, NSF and SPRIND is a match to some extent. You've just on stage here announced a partnership. Bridget, could you tell us a little bit more what this partnership will consist of?
Sure, absolutely. So we're very intrigued by the SPRIND challenge model and learning about it. I mean, we are funding scientists, but we're also scientists ourselves at heart. We came from the lab. Erwin and I both spent time in the lab. I've worn my lab coat. I think with the entering into the SPRIND challenge, we might need more safety goggles rather than the lab coat. But here we are to do an experiment, to join SPRIND, to see their way of promoting disruptive innovation, to add some of what NSF's flair and what we've learned along the way too, and to see are there grand challenges that both societies care about that we could address better together. We have a firm belief that it's not a single point of view that is going to solve a problem, that you need diverse voices. And the US and Germany are similar in many ways. We share a lot of values for academic freedom and openness and transparency in the scientific system, but we also have different points of view, different histories, different ways of doing things. And if we bring those different perspectives together, can teams who are either competing or working collaboratively to solve a challenge achieve more? And so we're quite interested in partnering with SPRIND and creating opportunities for researchers in Europe and the United States to apply for funding from NSF and from SPRIND to be able to work together and solve a grand challenge.
What are the first steps planned? How do we start together?
Yeah, so I think first thing that happened today, today was I think historic moment in time in the sense that on stage, as you said, we signed a memorandum of understanding that indicates that we are committed to working together, right? So over the course of the last few weeks and months leading up to today, Bridget and the rest of the team at NSF has been working closely with the SPRIND team to start to conceptualize what might be specific topic areas that are of shared interest between Germany and the US, between SPRIND and NSF TIP. So I think the first step beyond today is to take some of those ideas and really hone in on what are the one or two challenge areas that we really want to focus on out of this starting gate. And so we're going to work to try to craft that. We're going to work to try to shape that and sort of formalize that over the next few months so that we can come out with an announcement for the community to start to respond to. So that's really, I think, the first concrete step. And then from there, it's about using the SPRIND model, right? Using the mechanism that SPRIND has developed with the challenge approach, with this disruptive innovation, with the mentoring and the teaming and the juries that come in that are sometimes predefined prior to the proposals even arriving, to really step then through a multi-stage process over the course of many months to take some of the teams that have these great ideas in response to the challenge and work them forward to potentially getting to a winner or multiple winners even.
Bridget, you've just stressed shared values, obviously different perspectives on many things, but in many senses, we are culturally, and in terms of our values, in terms of our society as being liberal democracies, much more like than other regions in the world that are engaging in what some people call a tech Cold War. So obviously the world is very paralyzed. It's also quite paralyzed, but it's polarized in many senses. So cooperation, transatlantic collaboration on radical innovation, is that something that is sort of part of the idea? Or would you say that's basically something apart? It's not something that has a lot to do with geopolitics. I know it's a tricky question.
Yes, it's a tough one.
And you're a trained diplomat, I think. You've worked for the State Department, so I'm sure you're now measuring your words.
Yes, well, so the National Science Foundation has partnerships with many places around the world.
Including Chinese?
Yes, including China. We have a partnership that involves the UK, Israel, and China, and it's on understanding the ecology and evolution of infectious diseases. Mm-hmm. So how do we figure out how are infectious diseases like SARS-CoV-2, like the COVID virus, where did they come from, and how do they evolve so that we can better understand them in the future? So there are places for partnerships there with places like China. And there are places for partnerships with other countries too. It could be based on the scientific strengths of different countries. It can be based on geopolitics as well. I mean, as you mentioned, shared values is quite important. And as we're moving into spaces where there's going to be intellectual property, and we're going to have to think about how do our researchers work together and share and protect that intellectual property, it's valuable to be working with a partner that we have strong shared values with.
Sorry for pressing you on that, Erwin, but is it the bifurcation of the world, of the tech stack of the world in many senses, not something that plays into here?
So look, at the end of the day, I think that there's no doubt that there's competition afoot when it comes to these key technology areas like AI and quantum and biotechnology and wireless and so forth. If you ask a member of Congress who voted for the Chips and Science Act in the United States 2.5 years ago and specifically endorsed the Directorate for Technology, Innovation and Partnerships, many of them will tell you that they did so because they have concerns about the levels of investment that other nations are making, and particularly the People's Republic of China, are making in some of these key technology areas. And to Bridget's point, I think values matter in terms of who gets to a technology or an innovative outcome first, right? The values by which we carry forward, I think, have a huge influence on how those technologies ultimately surface. So, I think that we have to realize that we're living in a geopolitical world, and we're living in this particular moment in time, right? We've had other moments in time in the past as well. Right? And in every single one of those instances, I think that we've strived to understand how we work together with those who do share our values in trying to surface great new innovations, great new breakthroughs, and ensuring that those values help drive how those innovations are unlocked into the world around the world.
As you mentioned, the CHIPS and Science Act and other big packages of science funding now, which have been put in place in the recent couple of years, has that changed the role of the NSF at all?
So I think the CHIPS and Science Act really had two parts. There was the CHIPS Act, which was really focused on how can we do a better job of designing and manufacturing the next generation of semiconductors, and how can we, frankly, reshore semiconductor production and boost up our supply chains and our supply lines when it comes to manufacturing cars and manufacturing refrigerators. Everything is driven by a chip these days. So that's the CHIPS part. The and science part of the legislation is the part that really intersected with the National Science Foundation very prominently, in the sense that it established this new directorate for technology, innovation, and partnerships. First time in 32 years that NSF has stood up a new directorate. We don't do this every day. We've been around for 75, right? So almost half our existence we went without a new directorate. And it really charged this new directorate with this focus on accelerating technological development, accelerating technology translation into practice. Now, I would argue, and I think Bridget said it really eloquently earlier when you asked about what is the National Science Foundation, that for our entire existence, we've been focused on expanding the frontiers of foundational and use-inspired science. It just so happens that this directorate is really trying to emphasize the use-inspired and translational aspects, while many of our other directorates, biology, computer science, engineering, continue to do the great work that they've been doing for many, many years. And the great work that has led to our ability to have an internet, our ability to have smartphones and tablets with touchscreen interfaces, an ability to have optimized organ transplant networks, an ability to be able to have MRI scanners that help us detect various diseases. So those breakthroughs we want to keep seeing come forward. We also want to figure out how we can work with those directorates and others in the ecosystem to really accelerate those breakthroughs into practice as rapidly as possible. Because the problems we face as a society, as a nation, as a world are pretty significant today.
Bridget, you said you come from the lab, the two of you.
Yes.
What did you work on when you were still wearing white?
With my white lab coat, I would use my lab coat when I was either running mice through learning mazes, or when I was usually like pipetting protein sludge in the cold room, and I was quite cold. So that would be my excuse for wearing my lab coat. But I was looking at how are the brains different in mice with autism and mice without autism. And if we can understand how those brains are different, can we then develop drugs that can target that difference and make changes? And we had some success with that. We identified a drug target. We got a patent. There was a company that was started based on that patent and then would send me small molecules to test in the lab. We found a drug candidate that seemed great in mice. Unfortunately, it didn't work in humans. But the company was able to use the platform that it had developed to test those drugs and sell it to a much larger company for $187 million, of which I got none because it was a different platform. So I'm still, here working for the government.
Poor mice, poor you.
But, it was
like to think
cool.
it's great working for the government.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we'll still need a breakthrough there, don't we, in autism? But what was your field of expertise in the lab?
So actually, Thomas, we're more similar than we are dissimilar. So my field was in computational systems biology. So maybe unlike Bridget, I didn't wear a lab coat on a day-to-day basis because I was in a dry lab. I was behind a computer screen, but we were taking reams of data that Bridget and others would generate, right? Folks like her, and would publish. We would take those data, we would integrate those data into computational models, and those computational models would then simulate what's going on inside of a living cell, and would help us be able to identify where there are perturbations, where things might be going wrong, so that we could potentially identify the mechanisms that give rise to disease, as well as then what are the interventions that can mitigate those disease mechanisms and can address those challenges. And so one of the things that we looked at was actually another place where we need a major breakthrough still, but a disease called glioblastoma multiforme, which is the deadliest form of brain cancer that we know of. And so we worked closely with pathologists at my institution to be able to take some of their data, to be able to generate models, and to ultimately identify a couple of targets that had not previously been detected as ones that were predictive, right? Predictive as to the survival of a patient who was diagnosed with that particular disease. The survival rates are terrible across the board in that disease, and still are. But there was a little bit of predictivity in terms of some of these markers that we were able to identify. So yeah, I mean, I think these are examples, right, between Bridget and me and thousands upon thousands of scientists around the world who are working on research questions that can have significant impact on people's lives and people's livelihoods. And I think that's why we're so excited about this partnership, because it helps us be able to put that front and center and really try to accelerate to impact some of these ideas that scientists have. Yeah,
sounds like just like another proof that there's so much room for innovation leaps, which brings us to my last question, which I ask all my guests. What would be your favorite breakthrough innovation leap in 25 years from now? If you sort of free to wish it'll happen, what would be your personal wish?
So I've spent the last couple of days with the circular biomanufacturing teams here as part of your challenge. So I've been thinking about how do we take waste and turn it into something really valuable. And NSF has funded one startup and a community to work with them that's done a small bit of this already. So I'll tell you about the small bit and then where we'd like to see it go in the future. But it's a company called Re3D, and it works with Habitat for Humanity in Texas. So Habitat for Humanity is building new homes for low-income residents in Texas. And the 3D printing part of it is taking plastic waste and allowing the residents then to design stools, furniture, vases for their homes, and then having a mobile 3D printer that can then print those items that could then be in their home. They've used recyclable plastic bottles. They've worked with a local factory that has a lot of plastic waste when it's making ID badges for folks coming in and out of the building. So they've done that, but I'd love to see the future of that sort of 3D printing, where you could be taking the waste right off the construction sites, taking that same plastic that's extra on the construction sites, putting it right there into your 3D printer, and then printing out the widget that you need for the next stage in your construction site. Or I can imagine I have young kids, and there's always new toys that they want, but the toys are changing as they're developing rapidly so quickly. So can you
put them in the printer and then get their new
take the plastic
thing out of it
from the toy that's appropriate for a 1-year-old, stick it in your 3D printer, and print out the new toy that's ready for the 2-year-old, so that we're not throwing that waste away. And it'd be even faster than, ordering something on the internet and having it delivered the next day if you could print it overnight at home.
Sounds fantastic. Something small that would mean a huge leap, wouldn't it? Erwin?
That's super cool. I love that.
What's your wish?
So I'm going to go back to my roots. I just talked about brain cancer. So I'm going to give you an example of a project that we have funded in North Carolina. It's the Regenerative Medicine Regional Innovation Engine. And so Bridget talked a little bit about these regional innovation engines. We funded 10 of them this past year all across the U.S. And one of them is in the state of North Carolina, and it is focused on tissue engineering, different approaches for regenerative medicine, really trying to think about skin grafts, solutions that we might take, creams that can be helpful for patients who have skin burns as a result of radiation from cancer and so forth. So it's very much a healthcare-oriented engine. And when I visited that engine and had conversations with some of the team members who were working on it and some of the companies that were coming into Winston-Salem, North Carolina, because they were excited about the innovation that was coming out of that location, one of the things that I kept being reminded of is these days, everywhere you turn, right, somebody who's affected by some form of cancer. And depending on the form of cancer it is, you could have a reasonable prognosis. We seem to be doing better these days with breast cancer, for example. Or you could have a really poor prognosis. And you may have done everything right in your life, and yet you still have a very poor prognosis. And so I think the disruptive innovation for me is really thinking about what's the solution here, right? And 25 years from now, are we still going to be talking about it in the way that we're talking about it today? That you get a diagnosis for cancer and everybody says your life changes before you? Or are we going to be talking about it as that was 25 years ago, and today we've been able to figure out a means to give people a different glide path, a different perspective when they get that diagnosis, because it's much more pervasive, it seems anyway, than it has been, and it's a big problem that we have to reconcile for everyone who has it.
Yeah, very interesting. And another example for that, an innovation leap always has a before and an after. And when we've come to the point that when we hear the word cancer, don't have to be as afraid anymore as we are today, then we are after.
And it'll take innovation in AI and machine learning and data analytics, predictive modeling, all techniques that NSF supports. And then it takes partnership with, in our case, the National Institutes of Health in the US, partnerships with others around the world.
Interesting. Thank you very much, of course, for sharing your thoughts with us, but even more for kicking off the partnership of Sprint and NSF. Thank you very much, Erwin and Bridget.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Also, thank you very much for your time and attention, dear listeners. If you like our podcast, we'd be delighted if you could leave a review or rate it in your podcast app. Our producer today, as always, is Max Zöllner. Many thanks, Max. In 2 weeks, we're going to have the next episode. And until then, as always, please stay curious.